Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Avasano. Today's guest is David Yeo, founder and CEO of Innovez One. For those that are not familiar, Innovez One has been delivering expert maritime software solutions for the world's busiest ports and towage operators. With a vision to automate complex maritime operations for port, towage, and workboat operators worldwide, the team has engineered and developed the marineM platform that helps users optimize critical maritime resource allocation for their operations. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
You know, this is really great. We were talking before we got recording here, and I've had some recent kind of interactions with people on the supply chain and port side. And, you know, we talk a lot on this podcast about seafarers and the ships and everything that goes along with that, which is great, which is important. But sometimes, and I think we have to come back to this once in a while, we forget about where it all starts or where it all ends, and that's at the port. And it seems like David and his team have been doing some really cool stuff. So we're going to discuss that as well as the greater kind of need for ports and becoming more digital. So David, tell us a little bit about what's going on and the latest and greatest at Innovez One.
Yeah, so we spent quite a bit of time looking into technologies that is most applicable to the maritime sector. Maybe a bit about my background is that I've been in the maritime tech since 2005. So it's been almost about 20 years now.
That makes you, I'm going to start you right there. That makes you one of the dinosaurs in this industry, because a lot of people who are starting early, I just started 3 years or 5 years, but you're one of the as the kids say, my kids will be very upset if I say it, as the kids say, the OG, you're original, like you're an early adopter there.
Well, I mean, I've got a device to prove. I mean, when we first worked on these projects with in those days was PSA Marine in Singapore. It was with the Nokia phones. I'm not sure if you remember the Nokia phones, and that was way before the iPhones and, all the mobile smart devices. So started then we developed our first project with PSA Marine. It was mainly to digitalize the pilotage and towage operations and be able to receive real-time updates of their jobs and and send the updates back from the harbor locations back to the control center. And that was really the project that we first worked on. But I've always been loving how to develop different technologies and solutions and to improve the way business do stuff. So that was really what we do overall.
With imports and even within shipping companies, what we find is there's a lot of siloing. I don't know if that's a good way of saying it, of data. And even with shipping companies, like I said, like you'll have operations, you'll have chartering, technical, and that they all use a lot of similar data, maybe in slightly different ways, and certainly for slightly different uses. How have you guys faced that on the port side as well? Because it sounds like with PSA, you have discrete users and groups of information, and a lot of it is the same, or at least there's a significant overlap. Talk a little bit about that challenges.
Yeah, I mean, this data silos is quite common in ports, obviously, because over time, they build up their data basically using legacy systems. And then you have various departments, and sometimes they do share data and sometimes they don't. Some larger ports will use enterprise applications, but the mid-sized, smaller ports will actually be using, potentially Excel sheets or even client-server sort of applications that do not allow the sharing of data. And for the most part, this data is just sitting there. Most of the time, it's not being utilized, maximized in any way. And the perception is to keep the data there just in case. And ultimately, whether they're utilized or not, they might not. Most of the time, they're not being utilized. Really, the main job is to, when we do approach the ports, is to help them see the benefits of not siloing the data, doing the reverse, basically. And most of the time, it requires the support of leadership to make any significant changes in that regard. Ports are mostly driven by economic and commercial benefits. So the undertaking of such projects will require actually a very strong project sponsor. And usually that means that we need to speak to the CEO, the COO, the CIO of the port. And to help them be able to be able to appreciate the cost benefits of actually being able to share data, of utilizing that data. For the most part, we do that by demonstrating how this data can be utilized, and to help them see the value of using technology to utilize the data to create basically various benefits, particularly in terms of solution.
You mentioned some of the challenges is just getting to that C-suite. I mean, do you still get a lot of people who are skeptical of sharing data even at that level? You would think that, that level is maybe a little bit more open, but you could run into a lot of blockers. Do you still run into that on a day-to-day, or is it maturing in that way as well?
Yeah, but 5 years ago, I would run into that quite a bit actually. They would keep the data themselves. But today, it's changed quite a lot. I think post-COVID, it has radically changed the way port executives look at data. Particularly with post Chat GPT launch, people are being exposed to AI almost on a daily basis. I mean, on a daily basis, you interact with AI on your phones, with
Right.
Siri,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Alexa. So the actual benefits, they are experiencing on an individual basis, and they are able to then say, how can this data be utilized for their ports? How can they help them make better decisions, automate certain tasks, streamline their operations? I think port executives are looking into these opportunities even today, particularly with things like green corridors. There's no way, you need to look at port operations, changes in port operations. And how do you change port operations? You look at how you can derive value from data, how you can do estimation, make predictions from data, because those are your operational data that happens on a day-to-day, and some things never change. And data can provide, it can unlock a lot of value for port today.
Yeah, you've hit on a few really interesting topics, but I want to go back a little bit to your kind of role as CEO. What when you kind of where do you fit in on this? Are you looking mostly in kind of helping your team expand, or when you kind of go to these ports, are you sitting in with the senior leadership and kind of talking to them as well? Because I think that that's always fascinating, being kind of in the role that you're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, my day to day is very much consumed by 12 to 6 hours of work. I mean, I'm still sitting out here at 7 p.m. I'll continue other conversations at 9 p.m. So this is on top of the daddy roles that I play to my three young kids. But on a day-to-day basis, I speak to my head of sales in UK to review our global opportunities. We have various opportunities across the world now. In Central America, that we're having some opportunities that we're speaking with. We're talking to opportunities in the Middle East, and also in Southeast Asia, where I'm based. I also try to catch up with our various project implementation leads to check in on our progress of our projects that we're delivering. We have 3 implementations going on right now in Southeast Asia, also in the Middle East, and also one in Europe. So just to make sure that we're on track, and and if there are any issues, how can I help to clear some of the blockers that they have? But they are doing the job mostly on a day-to-day. Weekly calls, I'm doing with the principal engineers to look at to review our development progress, particularly to make sure that our timelines for our roadmaps are being met. Because on a quarterly basis, I have to report back to the board whether we're achieving our milestones in terms of our roadmap. Then most of the time, I'll be following up some new ideas, things to do in relating to the new features that we are developing, new products that we're wanting to launch in the next couple of months. That really forms a big part of my time actually, because I used to be doing the door-to-door sales, knocking.
Right.
But I think more recent 2 years, I've been spending a lot of time strategizing, looking into product development and what are the new features and functionalities that we want to build in, and what are the new products that we want to launch in the next 6 to 12 months.
Oh, you're speaking my language with roadmaps. For those that don't know, I'm a principal product manager at Vesson. So you're speaking my language of roadmaps and
Yep.
milestones and what we're thinking about, a few months,
Yeah.
the ahead, whether it's months, weeks, years, so on. And it's always an interesting challenge, especially given in light of some of the things that you just mentioned earlier, in particular things like AI, things like Green Corridor. Let's talk a little bit about AI a little bit more. And I think it's
Yep.
really fascinating. We've seen it accelerate here. I think the one
Mm.
thing is what you mentioned, which is great, which is we've already, we've had it around us. It's been using it, maybe even like in Uber and other things that we use on a daily basis. And it's just coming to the forefront. When you talk to these executives and going back to that conversation, and they're starting to realize, pre-COVID, very much or a lot more siloed, a lot more difficult conversations post-COVID, realizing that that needs to change. And I think also there's a realization of there's value in the ports that I think people had no idea were actually there. And we've seen with global upheaval, whether it's COVID or the Russian invasion in Ukraine, Israel and Hamas now changing
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
on a daily basis, which
Yep.
makes ports like extremely more valuable. How is the conversation around AI gone? I think it's kind of interesting because it's not the silver bullet necessarily, because a lot of people I've talked to said, oh, it's a silver bullet, but it's for other people it's the complete opposite. It's the boogeyman, so to speak. It's going to take our jobs. It's
Mm.
going to make us obsolete. We're going to go down a road like the Terminator. Where when
Yep.
you talk to these executives and you kind of start to think about your roadmap with AI in particular, what's that conversation like, and what are you thinking?
To be honest, when I first talked to them about it, in back in 2017, maybe 18, the look on their faces, is like, what are you talking about? We're happy with what we have, and we're talking about in those days, we're still using a lot of paper-driven pilot card sheets, But today, the conversation has changed drastically. They are starting to inquire more about how the technology is applicable to their operations. From operations perspective, they know exactly what is out there. In fact, they learn about how AI technologies can be utilized for example, predicting vessel arrival times, and obviously for the ports. Vessel arrival ETAs is one of the big question marks, because often that cause a lot of problems related to congestion, idle time, and so on and so forth. So the conversation has gone from how to utilize that technology to what are the strategies that needs to be in place in terms of application and solutions, so that they can support the overarching goal of reducing emissions, of streamlining their operations efficiencies, boosting their customer confidence in their operations. So that conversation has changed drastically from that from the early days. For us, we focus on the areas in harbor port operations, and we know that in that area that we can make a difference from perspective of efficiencies and also reduction of emissions, particularly for port emission sources. So and also for port operations, as I said before, need to change to enable green corridors, right? So we utilize AI in our products to provide the port the right levers to optimize the operations and the port costs. And it's just in line with where most of the port executives are talking about what they're looking at in terms of advanced form of technologies for AI. And also to achieve the goals that set forth by IMO. So yeah, really that is the sort of conversations that I see increasingly.
As these executives and as you go into ports and whether when they implement, let's say, some sort of digitization, and let's just say it's your platform or other platforms that are kind of tying in,
Yeah.
um and like you said, it starts from the top and it goes down, typical for the port or operations. When it starts to get kind of mid-level and day-to-day users, what's the feedback, or do you hear, what's the feedback do you hear that about technology and the implementation of it, or from, let's say, the day-to-day dock workers or the people who are running the port on a day-to-day, not necessarily the C-suite or executive level that's thinking more about business development, and their roadmap, I think, is more important, right? So
I mean, I've seen it's been a change as well, and even the mindsets of people at the at the mid level, even at the workers at the dock, they are using our devices, they're using our applications to execute the job updates. So we have apps for various parties, including pilots, tug masters, the mooring team, and they are able to receive jobs on the fly. Jobs are dispatched and scheduled and dispatched to them. And they've been really readily excited, actually enthusiastic about using these applications to provide the job updates. Because actually in the past, they are using these paper forms that they write in, and it gets very crumpled. You can imagine they stuff into the pockets, and then somehow when they go back to the port office, they will have to transfer some of this information into X. And I see that happen in real life, actually. So being able to do that one swipe, the one tap, and to have data being timestamped, sent across digitally on the fly, really helps them in their work, actually, in terms of the administration, post job. The mindsets have changed even for the workers on at the ground level. Recently, I've been working on a project in the Middle East, and these guys who are doing the planning, they are really excited to actually click on a button and have the system generate schedules for them automatically. In the past, they will have huge whiteboards where they have to list out basically individual resources has been assigned when the vessel calls at the port. Then they will have to rub it away, and then they have to replace it with with another name or with another resource. It's all done manually, and having the system do this for them automatically and being able to predict actually the duration of the movement, just I guess it excites them. In response to their better understanding of a better appreciation of technology, there's also a high expectation, from them, for towards solution providers. So I do see a shift. I mean, working on this for the last 20 years, I see a big shift. 20 years ago, I nearly triggered a union problem just because I added an additional button on the screen.
you don't have to say. I know that's a hot button issue for some people, unions.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
come from a union family. It did me
yeah,
well. It paid for my glasses as a kid. I know a lot of people knock them. I support them. I was a member of three unions. I was a member of I was a longshoreman when I worked on tugboats, because it's part of why I tell people that they're like, oh, you're an Italian guy, a longshoreman. What are you doing over there? We have a good laugh on that. Then when I worked as a deckhand on Mobile Oil behind me, I was
yeah.
in the kind of the unlicensed union, and then when I worked as an officer, I was in a licensed union. So,
Okay.
I have no yeah, I'm, and both my parents were in their respective unions. So, but I could see the situation, what you're talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
20 years ago. And now I think, and not just the unions but everybody has to realize you have to kind of adapt this technology. The job is going to look different. Yes, there may actually be fewer dock workers. We're still going to need them, but instead of
yep,
having 50 people, run the port, it may
yep,
be less. It may not, it's not going to be two. It's not going to be 48. It's going to be, somewhere, and needing more technology savvy folks. And I think that's really interesting that you kind of saw that evolution of don't put
yeah,
a button onto it to, if you do this, you better do it right. Because I run into the same things as well, as a product manager. Well, you added this button, but it doesn't do exactly what I said. Well, and I'll have a kind of
yeah,
basically a user story with them and say, well, no, that's what you told me. No, but that's not what I wanted to do. And what they'll say to me, because I sell a product to shipbrokers, which I did for a long time, you should know
yep,
better, Chris. You should know this is what we want. And I'm like,
yeah,
well, I know it, but I'm not a mind reader, so you have to help me too. Do you
yeah.
do you find yourself like getting feedback that's or how do you interpret the feedback, especially not so much on the C-suite level, because they'll just give you the overall view, but when you talk to the people using it, whether it's the pilots or the towage operators or the guy or the gal standing on the dock, watching a container come in, how do you approach that feedback? I think it's kind of interesting.
I love feedbacks from users because, as you know, I'm not a seafarer. I've not been a seafarer. I've not been, I did volunteer to jump on the vessel with the pilots, right? Well, they never offered it to me actually. But anyway, I've never been a seafarer, so it was always a wonderful thing when they give you feedback about, it would be really nice if you had this particular feature and that feature, and so what we've done is we built up a whole database, a whole list of all the functionalities that we need to put into the product. And that's been developed over the last 5 to 6 years. And a lot of it is to make sure that, a technology, the AI technology that we built into our product is augmenting the roles of the worker, the user, the planner. It provides accurate and, I suppose, timely suggestions instead of trying to replace their role. Because, to be honest, you can't replace human intelligence, so to speak, but you can use technology to do a routine job 10 times faster and better,
Yeah.
in a sense, because you have all this data, you're coming from all different places. And that's really what we focus on. These feedbacks that we collect from various ports, and I'm not talking about just a specific region. We're talking about, getting feedbacks from, port users in Asia, in the Middle East, and also because they actually the different cultures also matter. So for example, the Europeans, they will want to have more hands-on. They want to have more control over the technology. Whereas another culture may say, you know what, I want the technology to do everything for me. I just want to click a button. I want it to be exact, precise, accurate, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I run into that when you say cultures, because I deal
Yeah,
a lot with some Europeans, and they're like, no, 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 we still want to look at the. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, and there are other people like, nah, man, like I just want to press a button, and then you got
yes.
the Americans who I think are split down the middle. But yeah, it's really interesting because you get into that kind of thing.
Yeah,
That's yeah,
yeah.
interesting.
But that's important to consider in the product development because then you make it you make the product, so to speak, more human and more usable.
Right.
And you can then configure the product to adapt to the various users. And
Yeah,
that's really quite important from that aspect. So yeah, so we do spend a lot of time doing that. But one thing I thought helped a lot in recent years is that I realized that a lot of port planners, pilots, top masters, they all have a mentality for the greater good. So they have, in terms of the greater good for the company, in terms of efficiency, port operations. So there have been a lot more, I guess, not just cooperative, but also they want to contribute to the project.
yeah,
But also from a more macro level, a greater good for because of climate change. They know that
yeah.
technology digitalization helps, drive improvements, for reduction of emissions. So I see a lot of activity in terms of their contribution, giving ideas about how to do things better. So yeah, I really appreciate, these users.
It's a little bit more indicative in our business because it is a connected business. You can't
Yeah,
just look at, okay, I'm a a local manufacturer, or not even that, but like I'm a local business that serves this community, which is great, right? You need all that, but they're
yeah,
not worrying about, oh, the connectivity of it all, although their products may come from Asia, and their gasoline came from a refinery in Europe, and or here, or their crude oil came from the Middle East, and then processed here and put on a tugboat. Like, they don't care about any of that, right? Whereas we in the industry, and I know that was the thing that kind of attracted me to the maritime space, was that kind of connectivity to it, even way back when I graduated college, actually 30 years ago today, interestingly enough. So it's an interesting type thing. I want to pivot a little bit, and you mentioned it earlier, green corridors. Uh,
yeah.
firstly, kind of give us a very high level about what they are, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about how kind of ports play a role in that green corridors, because I've heard this used, and I think we're still a little bit on the early adopter side of green
Yeah.
corridors. I don't feel what I've read. Again, I'm not a port guy. I follow it enough to be dangerous, like I like to tell people. But so talk, yeah, talk to me a little bit about like green corridors, what you're doing with them, and kind of, well, firstly, but the high level, and then kind of what you're doing with them, and how they've evolved a little bit.
Yeah, so corridors essentially, for participating ports for specific trade routes where they will start to implement zero emission solutions. Right, in short, that's what really they're doing. Primarily not to just to generate emission reductions, but also its ultimate objective is to help the industry reach that tipping point where they can drive large scale adoption, across the industry, particularly for I'm talking about shippers, the shipping, the ports, and so this is typically this supported by participating ports to introduce new technologies, infrastructure, public sector to introduce incentivizing the participating members, stakeholders, providing funds. So really, that's what for in the green corridors at this stage. I believe is at the initial phase, as you mentioned, is really about the phase of a discovery or what are the right technologies to put in place, what they call the emergence phase. But this is where they will coordinate development between ports that they member ports where they sign off certain agreements about what they're going to be what a solution they're going to put in place. So that's in short what it is, as far as we understand. Now with that, it also means that they are also looking at technologies, right? So technologies like just in time is important. So if you look at partner ports like Singapore, between Singapore and Rotterdam, they are sharing information to drive
Right.
just, and there are many other solutions. I mean, they are trying to look into optimizing routes and so things like that. As a company, we are introducing just-in-time solutions ourselves. So we want to target just-in-time solutions for not just for the large ports, but for mid-size and smaller ports. But key to that is to look into to make sure that the language of communication between ports will be built into the product.
Right.
So a key element of it is to in terms of product development is to look at how we can build that sort of language into the product and be able to host it for mid-size, small ports. Yeah, so that's something that we're doing on this front.
Yeah, and I can imagine one of the big hurdles, or one of the big at least challenges to some extent, is going to be things like standardization, right? Like, because
Yeah,
like you just
yeah,
talked about, culturally between the Europeans and some parts of the world, it's very different, as we know. But
yeah,
then the standards, which I know just from a very high level, is something that's always given people a lot of angst, and kind of kind of angst in going over. So certainly that's one of the challenges. But I do think it's kind of interesting, the ports working together. You've seen this all over the place, and I think it can add to it, because you talk about just in time. I remember when I was studying kind of supply chain back many years ago, and just in time was all the rage in that kind of
yeah,
early 90s, mid 90s. It was very much the rage, and now it's still just in time, but it's just in time, but we don't want to sit around, right? So you kind of have to balance that, because that's what causes emissions, and you could be more efficient
yeah,
at sea. And that's an
exactly.
interesting approach to it as
Yeah,
well. As
yeah,
we move along, we've touched a lot of great topics, and we've talked about the evolution that you've seen. I always love to ask this question, and I think you could bring a great view to it. So if you have somebody who comes in and sitting where you are, certainly Singapore is, attracts a ton of talent for people in digitization and maritime.
yeah,
If you're talking to people and they're looking like, well, I could do this, or I could go do something more for, let's say, SpaceX or Tesla, or work for another startup, AI startup, and you're talking to somebody, whether to bring them on board, or maybe going to a university, talk about what you do, what would you tell people about the maritime space, And though you said like I'm not a seafarer, I'm not a yeah, you've been in it long enough, and you're like I said earlier, you're one of the OGs of the tech world. Because you don't meet too many people who've been in the business for 20 years. I think I've had a handful, but they're all very been around like yourself. What do you tell those folks looking to get into the industry?
For executives and for for technologists and people who are interested in technology and applying technology, I think this is a great industry to get into in the next 5 6 years. I think there's a lot of need for upskilled workers in this sector, because we're talking about people, a new generation of people who understands AI, a new generation of people who understands how to how to create what they call prompts, for to get AI to work on their behalf. And so I think that generation of people who are exiting the universities or graduating the universities of today, and their skill sets, their knowledge will be really useful for the maritime tech space. And actually, if we consider the fact that the maritime tech space is really a space where it is there's huge needs to it's a catalyst. It plays a catalyst role in lowering CO2 emission, and applying technology to do that. Then we do need all these new guys, new blood, new engineers. I'm quite proud to say that Singapore just recently launched a new startup, and they introduced the electrification of vessels, hovercraft vessels. Can you imagine? I'm looking at it. I was thinking, these are the new generation of Elon Musk, right? Instead of putting
Yeah.
electrified cars on the road, now they're trying to put it, in a harbor area. And Singapore being such a busy port, having hovercrafts to electrify is a huge thing. And just you need skill sets of engineers, electrical engineers, people who knows about this stuff, right, to come into this industry. So yeah, I think a lot of opportunities for the new graduates, to definitely come into this sector, and also for businesses creating new technologies. A lot of opportunities for innovation. We're not talking about just IT solutions for your typical enterprise ERP systems. We're talking about opportunities for fintech. I mean, we're talking about fintech in terms of payments, but
Oh yeah.
there's need for payment models to be used in the maritime tech as well. For example, if I want to execute a payment to a hovercraft transporting passengers to Anchorage, do I need to go through the banking system? Because right now the hovercraft providers have to wait for weeks before they get paid. What
Yes.
if they're paid immediately, just
Yeah.
off the fly?
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah, within well, I'm still alongside before I let anybody let the gate down.
yeah,
I want to see my
yeah,
money.
exactly. There's a sort of opportunities there's out there in the market that we can still disrupt. Frankly, the agency model has been around for too long. It's opaque. It drives up costs. It's a lot of inefficiencies. The agency model, can it be disrupted? And I think some players will come in and disrupt that market as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you kind of hit upon, and I interviewed a gentleman at a company called Vision, their container tracking company,
Yeah.
and he mentioned something really interesting. I think it ties into the connectivity and kind of the opportunities that you talk about. He said that if you make a 0.5% change on the efficiency of global trade, that's billions of dollars, right? Because
Mhm.
you talk about $1 trillion, trade, and there's very few things within our opportunities that people have to do a job that you can make that material impact, right? And I think
Yeah.
that that's what makes it really interesting. Now that's the high end, but if you talk about things, especially around emissions and efficiencies, there's a lot there that you could definitely see and make it and really kind of affect a trajectory or implement a policy that's better. We've had a lot of people come on the podcast say, I understand what the regulations are, but my company wants to do better, right? And how do we
Yeah.
look to do better within the confines? And I think that's a really interesting part. This has been a great conversation. As we wrap up, busy executive, like you said, you have three young children, you're running around, you're all over the place, you're probably answering client calls and you're answering sales calls and then you're answering sales and clients calls, that help with the developers. When you're traveling or when you're doing something, what are you reading? Now, before you answer that, you can answer this a few ways. I've had people say, Chris, I'm very busy, so I listen to audiobooks or I just listen to podcasts or I
Mhm.
listen. I've had a Coast Guard admiral say, because I'm in charge of engineering plans, I read engineering plans at night. I think he's an engineer. He's an engineer by trade. So I'm like, wow, man, you're really dedicated, like reading engineering plans at night before you go to bed, man. That says a lot. But what are you reading? And we've had people say, listen, I'm writing a book. I have a few book writers, so not sure if that's in your wheelhouse on what you're doing.
I enjoyed the travels that I've been doing. I love understanding cultures. I've traveled to Africa in various African nations. I traveled through Africa. I went to Europe, Central America, to Asia, China. One of the things that I always try to endeavor to do is to understand the world. I'm trying to understand, what people think, how cultures are different. And this book is totally unrelated to maritime. It's called The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio, sorry. So it's about how the past empires, and have emerged and how they have collapsed, and how it's replaced by another empire, and now we're in the totally new era. I'm just trying to understand well, in short, what in the world is going on, right? In terms of mindsets, in terms of mentality, and really, it's just for myself to position the company in a better place, to be ready for what's to come. In terms of in terms of finances, in terms of our strategy, where should we plant the next flag, for example? Where should we start a new office, right?
Yeah.
And it's really for me to really understand the world and and understand what's going on, and which is why especially when I'm on a plane, I'll flip the book and and continue my reading. But yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's a good one, and I know he's written a lot of books and is considered generally. I know he was at one point the head of one of the largest
Yeah,
private equity firms here in the U.S. And I've
yeah.
seen him on a lot of different places. So it sounds pretty interesting and certainly applicable for what we do. David, thank you for coming on the podcast. This has been
Thank you.
super informative. And I'm really excited to talk. It was really excited to talk to you about all this and especially hear about how your evolution of the last 20 years has gone and kind of where we're looking at in the future. David, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.